Hi everyone, I want to talk about groups and how ridiculously overpowered group play is going to be in Diablo 4. And I can give you some examples. So generally group play is going to be quite a lot better than solo play. We have seen this in other games, for example in Diablo 3, where generally group plays are always more efficient. You have party synergies, you have XP bonus for being in a party, and of course in an open world game like Diablo 4, there are other shenanigans, like you can actually teleport to each other and potentially skip long travel distances and these kind of things. So there are these like typical group buffs, I guess, that just come into play, just, by virtue of having more people doing things and running around. And of course, because you can synergize with your builds. You can combine various, support characters potentially, or even just builds that kind of harmonize in some way. For example, ice shard sorcerers that just proc off each other's frost novas, for example, or you can combine such an ice shard sorcerer with an ice or cold imbue rogue, for example. So of course the fact that you have more puzzle pieces allows you to just be more efficient, because you can potentially have hyper scaling of builds in some form. But exactly what you see here is also very powerful. Like, you can just TP to another party member, you can get a waypoint. In fact, you can even do that when you don't even have this stronghold cleared here. This is one of the strongholds. But of course, teleporting to each other is nothing really fancy. This is very expected in a multiplayer game, that they can actually play together and find each other. So of course you have trading between party members. So for example, when you play the same class, you're going to find the same loot. You can share it between each other, or you can just trade with other people. They can just give you stuff. You're absolutely going to see stuff like, streamers that have a huge community, just give them free gold, free items, free elixirs. So you have like a massively more powerful character than you should have because of that. Or you can just teleport to various places of interest. You can have people run towards the world boss for you, and then they invite you and you teleport to them. You can let them run to the dungeon. You can teleport to them for the dungeon. You can even have something like a cellar filled with goblins. That is actually a thing that is quite rare. Well, if you find a cellar filled with goblins, you're gonna invite 3 friends, and everyone gets a bunch of free legendaries. And if you just chain this back to back to back, that sounds pretty good to me, actually. So there's, of course, these kind of things that you can really go crazy with if you try. Now, another thing is that, for example, in outdoor content, enemies don't actually seem to scale up with the amount of people present. So I already showed this for the server slam with Ashava, for example. It doesn't seem like even the world boss scales with the amount of people present, or if it does, very little. And I think outdoor monsters just don't scale at all. So any kind of like outdoor zone farming, any kind of outdoor events are just significantly easier when more people are there. You can kind of like split up and just like, grab experience from people running around, just off screen somewhere, and kind of farm your way through the zones. Do side quests more efficiently, because you can potentially share and certain kill objectives and these kind of things. So that obviously also helps to speed up. It's a bit like split farming bounties in Diablo 3, I guess. On top of that, there's also like the event farm that people were doing. So I don't have a clip of that, but for example, under Kyovar Shard, there was like a certain event spawn that people were abusing in groups, and they were just like trying to get into their own instance all the time and reset the event that way, but just like server hopping, so to say. So they were TPing to town, they were coming back, they were in like a new layer of the same zone with a new event spawn. They finished it, and then they invited their friends right before they finished the event, and then you would just farm like ovals over ovals over ovals. Like every half minute or so, you could just complete an event if you did that right, and people were farming literally thousands of ovals per hour with that strategy in the server slam. So that was actually very feasible just a few weeks ago. But this is not really everything. It gets crazier than that, and this is that when you finish a dungeon, for example, in a group, you can actually share the renown and the completion. So you see me here finishing this dungeon, and Macrobioboy, who's in my party, actually does get the completion from it. So this is no joke. You can actually split farm the renown from dungeons and the codex powers. So you see here, you have this dungeon pop up at the end of a run. And now you can see that I was able to complete dungeons that I never stepped foot into. You see here, I'm standing literally in Kyovar Shard, and I get a dungeon completion. For example, for Dark Raven, from Theo just doing the dungeon for me. And the same here, like I'm in the middle of this sunken library dungeon, And Macro is doing the Pursuit Acuthier, which is like some dungeon in Kyrgyzstan. I was not even in the same zone, I believe, and it just completed a dungeon for me. So what you can actually do is when you have 4 people, not only can you like completely like teleport around to each other, share waypoints, share the loot, etc., but you can actually just like go through a zone and everyone does like 5 or 6 dungeons and you have the entire zone completed by split farming all of the renown and all of the dungeons. So I'm pretty sure this is a relatively major bug, but at least this is how it worked. Apparently, even going back to the open beta, people were apparently doing this, and I have also just retested this and it seems like it's still there. So this is how the game works right now. I mean, we might see a patch of this, maybe not. At least I don't think that we're gonna see a patch in time. You know, I'm pretty sure that people are aware of this. People are getting ready to do their strats exactly revolving around this split farming strategy. And of course, this is pretty important. Right now, I would estimate that like a really fast solo player can probably complete, you know, a full renown like zone in maybe like, you know, 4 to 6 hours or something like that. You know, just going through the entire fractured peaks on a fast build, doing all of the dungeons and then doing the strongholds, collecting the altars and the waypoints, and then maybe a few side quests. And at some point, you're kind of done with all the renown. And of course, if you can like literally multiply the speed of like half of these objectives by a factor of 4 or so, then yeah, it's gonna be pretty fast. You know, you can probably do like an entire zone, like an entire region of dungeons, like the entire fractured peaks, in maybe like an hour or less if you're really fast with a team of 4. At the very least, when it comes to the dungeon renown grind. But this is still not everything. So there are also just like regular game mechanics that are extremely group biased. So for example, talking about nightmare dungeons. So when you run nightmare dungeons, you have to use those sigils, and you also find those sigils when running them. And it appears like they actually drop for everyone in the party. So you can go in with 1 sigil and potentially come out with like 10 of them or so. And one really important strategy to maximize your efficiency when farming those nightmare sigils, which is like the primary way of leveling to 100 later on, at least once you have done all the other stuff, is you want to chain the same dungeons of, you know, a certain tier that you can farm fast and efficiently. So you want to try to stack up the same dungeon so you don't have to travel time, because every time you open another dungeon, you have to go there, and this takes like half a minute, 1 minute or so. So if you skip the travel and you actually potentially even split farm in a dungeon, you can do this really fast. Like some dungeons are definitely very well designed to be split farmed so that you can complete objectives at the same time. And the XP that you gain inside a dungeon is actually always shared no matter where you are. You can actually stand at the entrance and get XP from your other party members just killing something at the end of the dungeon. So you don't have to worry about losing anything there. And on top of that, you find all these nightmare sigils, so it's much easier to actually chain run the same dungeons over and over as a team, or at least chain like the best dungeons, because there's definitely better and worse dungeons. And you just go there, do like 10 runs of this dungeon, everyone opens their sigils, and then you go to the next dungeon, and then everyone opens the sigils again. And you repeat with just like, you know, the 2 or 3 best dungeons on repeat all the time. Whereas, for example, a solo player will have a much higher variety and a much more downtime as well because of the traveling in running those different nightmare sigils. But that's not everything. You also have the option to revive each other. So you see, for example, when you do like a really hard nightmare dungeon, you might actually like use up all those revives that you have. You see here on an ancestral tier sigil, there's only 4 revives. But if someone dies, you don't actually lose one of these revives. It only actually counts when you get up at the last checkpoint. But in a team, you can also revive each other. So as long as it's not a full team wipe, you can just revive each other. And it's also relatively easy to do so, because you don't actually need to channel a revive like from start to finish. It takes like 4 seconds or something like that. But the channel can be interrupted and you can come back and continue the channel. So you can just kind of like, even if there's monsters around, for example, you can just click on it, maybe half a second or 1 second, then, you know, run a circle, come back, stun the monster, and then finish the revive or something like that. So it's actually relatively easy to abuse the system and just revive each other all the time in case someone dies. And of course, especially when it will come to something like Nightmare Dungeon pushing, you actually want to stack up this Sigil powder so that you can craft those highest tier Nightmare Dungeons, potentially get one that is like relatively easy and has also easy affixes. And of course, with more people dropping all these sigils, it's going to be a lot easier to actually get those sigils that you can then try to open and then run together and get even more sigils, and can just like kind of perma print these sigils if you do like some group content, so to say. So even if you don't aim for like a tier 100, you could just do this for a little while on like some kind of height here. And you're going to produce so many sigils that you can salvage for the sigil powder that you kind of like set up for, you know, the end of time, so to say. But that's still not everything. There is actually also boosting in Diablo 4. So you can not just, you know, complete a Renown objectives for someone literally standing in town AFK, but you can also boost their characters to high levels really fast. We tried that out in our team, so we made a fresh character and we just skipped campaign. There's like the skip campaign button that after the first character that you have played, you can just make a fresh character and you can just go straight to the capstone dungeon and boost someone through this capstone dungeon. And the thing is that a low level character, like a level 1 character walking into the capstone dungeon that's like level 50, you do get a lot of XP. And again, you don't even have to be in danger. You can just stand at the entrance and just, yeah, forego the group XP buff, which is not really that significant, and just be protected and AFK leech, so to say, in the entrance of the dungeon. And then the carry just finishes the boss and you have Nightmare difficulty unlocked. Well, there you go. And then you repeat that with the second capstone dungeon and you have Torment difficulty unlocked. And well, now you're like a level 30 character already after like, you know, 5 or 10 minutes or so of completing these capstone dungeons. And we tried that, just like keep going a little bit after that. And we managed to boost one of our characters to level 50 in, I don't know, something like 45 minutes or so is probably quite achievable. So if you have like a fast build, maybe even faster. So we weren't like really trying to like super optimize around, you know, trying to defeat super low level enemies, so to say, at least when we did that. But when you have like a really endgame character, you can go real fast, you can fly through those dungeons, and some of those dungeons are really good to farm. And of course, in a group, you can also just reset a dungeon whenever you want to. You don't actually have to wait this like half a minute or 1 minute or so in front of a dungeon after completing it to try to reset it. In a group, you just reset the party and you go back in. So yeah, in general, I don't really have much of a problem with group play being good. You know, it's kind of fine. It's a multiplayer game. It's an online game. It's okay if there's like kind of like an incentive. I do have to say that some of these are a little bit over the top though, especially like this AFK leeching in dungeons, this AFK leeching in town to get Renown. Like you can literally have people just like, you know, standing in town and begging for someone to invite them while they are just AFK. Like we're gonna see that for sure. And of course, you know, trading is very, very powerful because rare items can be as good as legendaries later. So in general, group play and any kind of interaction with other people is very strongly, like, I would say recommended. And I would even say required for any kind of competitive play. So if you're trying to be like at the top, if you want to try to race to 100, then, well, as a solo player, you basically have absolutely zero chance. So just let me tell as much. And in general, of course, we don't have leaderboards in the game, so the competitiveness is not exactly like, you know, very, yeah, there, so to say. But people still want to try to compare, people still going to have their own competitions and all that kind of stuff. In terms of competitiveness, it's definitely a major issue, so people want to enjoy the game on their own as well. And if you don't have like really any chance whatsoever against group players, that's a bit of a problem. So it just takes away from the fun. Personally, I'm also a big solo enjoyer, so you know, I like the SSF life. At least I think long term, this is something that the devs should think about, you know, making some kind of SSF mode, or at the very least some kind of like SSF verification of some sort, so that people that actually do not want to have any kind of group advantages, no trading and all that, they can at least, like, you know, kind of prove that of some sort, and maybe have, you know, like a leaderboard filter for these kind of things. I think that would at the very least be very useful. Now, what it means for the launch of Diablo 4 is there's definitely going to be real money trading of items. They're certainly not going to try to find them in-game, because there's only the trade chat, and that's a really awful tool to try to find any kind of trading partner, either selling or buying. We're definitely going to have people that have either an army of bots or an army of followers, feeding them with gold, with items, with elixirs, so that they are generally just more powerful and have an easier time, and obviously to gain an advantage. And then there's also going to be like, you know, get your full fractured peaks, a dungeon completion, every, you know, all 23 dungeons, you know, just $3.99, stand AFK in town for 1 hour and you're done, kind of deals as well. So I definitely expect that to happen. Now, does it mean that the game is going to be terrible? Absolutely not. I think the game is awesome. I just want to kind of like shed some light on these issues though. So this is things that the developers need to pick up on and just try to fix, try to find solutions, like at the very least fix this dungeon split farm. I guess this is a relatively obvious one in my opinion. Maybe they weren't aware. So, okay, you know, it might get hotfixed, who knows. But in general, at least we need something, I believe, that makes solo play a little bit more worthwhile. I don't want to sound like I'm ranting about this now, it's just that this is how the game works, and I believe adjustments can be made. So that's about it. Let me know your thoughts about it. Maybe also weren't aware of a lot of these things. I imagine this is probably news to a lot of people. I actually talked about this earlier and did have a little podcast session with some of the PoE guys. I had Scissoran, Steel Mage, Nugian, and Karn, some really big PoE boys. They are going to start on the hardcore as well, trying to team up and get the level 100 first, which, well, I'm going to try solo. But it's going to be quite fun to see the difference between groups and solo, and let's see how crazy it can really be. In any case, hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys next time.